Hi guys, my name is Katie Versteeg and I am presenting my U.S. to Chinese Business Intercultural Communication Training Manual for intercultural communication. I apologize for just recording a video of my laptop screen. I tried to open my Docs app and do a screen recording on my phone, which looked way better, but I couldn't figure out how to put my voice in it with a voiceover, and I will try to hold the camera still. And I'm sorry, I also wish I could figure out how to full screen this PDF I downloaded, but I can't figure it out, and hopefully the PDF will be easier than just my Google Doc. Okay, so I'm just gonna take you through just the highlights of it. So we're gonna start. Okay, so I basically just introduced what the training manual is about, super straightforward, just here's what we're gonna cover. Not really missing anything there. So I go into talk about the cultural context and using the Hofstede website and talking about the dimensions of cultural variability that we've been through, the the power distance, the collectivist versus individualist, the uncertainty avoidance, and the high context, low context. So China is a high power distance culture, which we knew, and basically just talking about how the inequalities between status is accepted, and the subordinate superior relationship is more defined and like professional, I suppose. And then China is a collectivist culture, so they kind of orient themselves around their group, and as opposed to the US, which is, individualistic and more about personal achievement and not as much regard for a group. And then China ranks low on uncertainty avoidance, which kind of surprised me from the Hofstede website, that that the rules can sometimes be flexible to fit the situation, and that kind of makes sense in a reflection of the Chinese language about how there's so much ambiguity of, the way you say certain words and phrases can mean totally different things if you do, different tone or emphasis on the syllable, and that could confuse my little American employees. So I made sure to put that in there. And that 70 to 80% of Chinese businesses are small and family owned, so it's kind of like individual groups that people are super loyal to, as opposed to like this kind of big pool that American employees are working in, just kind of, going to a big corporate job, So the loyalty to your job is much more emphasized. And then China is a high context culture, so they take cues from nonverbal body language, and kind of the context of their environment that's like kind of implicit. And the US is a very low context culture, so that's a big difference that my employees should be aware of, to look out for body language. And also the textbook gives a great example of how China and the US use silence differently. Well, high context and low context cultures. How high context cultures are okay with silence because they get more information from nonverbal cues, but low context cultures have this concept of awkward silence and how people jump in with more words because there's nothing to fill the silence. We don't have as much nonverbal focus. And then the cultural context and value orientations. So I give this example from this great source I found about education in China, and how from the jump, Chinese students are taught about like a moral self, an internal self. And China is a very virtuous culture with a lot of history of like personal virtue and a lot of stories and stuff that the US just doesn't really have. We're only, 300 years old, and we come from all over, so it's kind of, there's not like an American super, moral self that is taught. So the US is more taught about like personal goals and skills and rising above in the ranks, where China is more taught kind of, in their culture and their group and things like that. And it is kind of a stereotype that Chinese people might feel more shame if their achievements don't meet their what is talked about their significant other standards. So like a parent or a boss or someone important in their life. That's what they mean when they say um, significant others. So yeah, and then the environmental context. Didn't really find much about kind of the use of space, but that China has a very big emphasis placed on privacy, and there's specific designations for privacy. So employees should be aware of this on the business trips, that private areas are like very sectioned off, and that subordinates enjoy privacy from their superiors enjoy superiors enjoy privacy from their subordinates, but not vice versa, which makes sense of the power distance, the high power distance. And then that China follows polychronic time, which and the US does monochronic. So polychronic meaning time is more abstract, monochronic meaning time is very compartmentalized. So that could be a hiccup in doing business with our Chinese partners. In the perceptual context, I talked about memory and how Chinese people perceive their early memories a little bit later than like white Americans, because non-Asian Americans, because Asian Americans might are likely to think of their earliest memories in terms of a group, which might come just a little bit later, whereas white American and non-Asian Americans would think of their earliest memories about just them, like when I did this and I did that and it's just me. And then I also used the great example from Professor Richard Nisbett in the textbook with the cow, chicken, and grass association that we did in class, that was used in China and the US, where US kids put the cow and the chicken together because when you look at them, they're both animals. But the Chinese children grouped the cow with the grass because they have that relationship of the cow eating the grass, which is really interesting and something simple that affects the way that life is perceived in the different countries. So the social relational context is really important because Chinese culture places a lot of emphasis on hierarchy, with a lot of factors: education level, wealth, age, sex, social class, even where you were born and where you live, which can kind of be seen in America, but everything is kind of heightened in terms of hierarchy in China. And how America, we have this kind of idea of a meritocracy, whether it's real or not, but this idea of anyone can rise above their rank and based on hard work, where that's not as prevalent in China. And then China is a masculine society, which is like the U.S., although I believe the U.S. was, I can't remember if it was in between. But yeah, that U.S. and China are both masculine because it places emphasis on work over family. That would take priority over families succeeding at work. But it's kind of for different reasons. Like in America, it would be personal success. In China, it's more about the group. So that definitely makes sense. So the verbal code, this was really interesting in this great source I found about Chinese and versus American addresses in formal situations. So, we might sometimes in America use professor or doctor. That is much more used and emphasized in Chinese culture. So you would always, it's not as casual. You would always use the formal address, and they even have this little symbol. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it is added after a surname if the person being discussed is a prominent figure, which I thought was really interesting. And just kind of wrapping it up here, I just talked about how in Chinese culture they have a greeting meaning, have you eaten? Which is kind of like their how are you? It doesn't really mean they want a real answer. It's just kind of what they say instead of how about this weather, which I thought was really cool. And then obviously they have a lot of difference in nonverbal. So China places more emphasis on the eyes, where America places more emphasis on the mouth, like smiling and frowning. And China more expresses emotion with their eyes. And I'm running out of time, but one super interesting thing is that the shushing gesture in America actually means disapproval in China, so employees should definitely avoid that because it would be taken offensively. And then the beckoning, calling someone over symbol in China is this, waving your fingers back and forth, turned down, which in America kind of means shoo, go away. So again, my American employees should definitely be aware of that not to be offended if that happens. And then I just talked about how wrapped up Chinese culture and the hierarchies and, just keeping it professional. And that is about it. Thanks.